Welcome to another episode of On the Issues with Alon Ben-Meir. Today's guest is Dr. Wiola Rebecka, a doctor of psychology and human rights activist whose work focuses on the long-term consequences of conflict-related sexual violence. In this episode, Alon and Wiola discuss the issue of abducted Ukrainian children in the context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which now marks its fourth year. They discuss the magnitude of this crisis in terms of number of children abducted, the various abuses taking place against abducted children, including forced Russianization and in some cases torture and sexual violence, and the support systems needed to care for these children in the aftermath.
Good morning, Viola.
Good morning,
First,
Professor.
thank you. I want to really thank you so much for taking the time, to join me on this very important podcast. The problem of children being abducted, it's one of the things one of the most painful things, especially when it comes to children. To me, this is, without any question, however we phrase it, it's a crime against humanity. So, and nobody is more knowledgeable about it, what's happening there than you are. So I'm sure our audience will enjoy to hear what you have to say about this criminal activities that Russia has been engaged in since the beginning of the war against the Ukraine. So first, I'd like to ask you, Viola, to give us a brief review about what your general take on what's actually happening, and then we'll continue our discussion from that point on. Yes, please.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. And thank you everyone who is already here and joined this podcast and is open to discuss this painful and really emotionally overwhelming topic. Talking about tortures against children, especially children who are experiencing active wars, is an easy topic. Today is the 4th anniversary of the full invasion on Ukraine, and mostly, if I am correct, we will discuss and covering the topic related to the violence against children in Ukraine. So my major topic of research is mostly about sexual violence, also about sexual violence on children during the war and genocide activities. I'm not working directly with children. However, when you're working on a trauma war, you're facing many different topics, including children rights violation. So 2 years ago, I got an opportunity to read really important report completed by the Lemkin Center in Poland, completed by the volunteers from Ukraine and Poland who were travel around Ukraine, and they were meeting with families and they interviewed children. I mean, mostly families with children who were violated by Russian forces. And they complete this report. Report is covering 2 years. The title of this report is The Stolen Childhood, and is about violence committed by the Russian forces. So I was deeply moved by the testimonies. So
Right.
it is important to know, like when we are interviewing people affected by war crimes, is a lot of challenges for the interviewers. Of course, for the people who are willing and they are open-minded to share their stories, but for the interviewers, you need to get ready to know how to interact with people who are affected by deep traumatic experiences. The level of the challenges is higher when you are working with children because of their age and their underage, right? So that's required more psychological sensitivity, especially trainings related to the trauma center approach, and also to understanding of dynamic of traumatic response when we are talking about these overwhelming experiences. So what I would like to highlight here, what is also important because of this report, like many of the interviewers, they were themselves victims. They are themselves are victims of the torture traumas, and
Right,
they
right.
went through with their own development and trainings to get ready to be more oriented and prepared to interview also children. I think that's the way. That's, of course, is another one topic to discuss, but that is really important to highlight that because I think personally that's the way how this kind of specific interview need to be proceed by people
Right.
who really deeply understanding this complexity of this topic. So that's how I fully, I mean, fully, that's maybe not correct word, but that's how I met this level of cruelty and war crimes on children in Ukraine during this current war.
Right. Yeah. I was reading, of course, on the subject matter, and the one thing that stood up, very stood out was the magnitude, the numbers of the children that have been abducted. Since, for example, 2022, February 2022, more than 20,000 were abducted.
Yeah,
And the United Nations estimates which is a staggering number, about more than 700,000.
yeah,
700,000 children being abducted.
yeah,
Uh, it is almost inconceivable.
yeah.
Uh, so the magnitude is such a mammoth proportion. How do you see that? I mean, we're talking about eventually, hopefully, many of them will be retrieved back, but these numbers are staggering. What is your take on it?
I think, like, from my perspective, that is pretty clear. Like, Russia is fighting of not only territory, but also is fighting of identity, and that's the part of the fight of their war. So, taking children from the Ukraine and trying to change their identity to Russian identity is the part of this war. As we know, like a sixth grade violation framework under the United Nations Security Council, who is monitoring and reporting sixth grade violation against children under armed conflict, and that is killing and maiming, recruitment and use of children, sexual violence, abduction, what you mentioned, attacks on school and hospital, and denial of humanitarian access. So one of the biggest challenges, I don't know if that is also correct statement, but one of the biggest by numbers reported right now and also reported by the journalists is an abduction challenge. So also 2 years ago, I was involved in some movie project, documentary movie project. We were interviewing a woman who spent some time in the Russian captivity as they were in the Russian jails, and one of them came with her son, who were abducted by the Russian forces when she went to jail. So we get an opportunity to talk to him. He's teenager. He was teenager. Right now he's approximately 17 years old. So he was talking about this entire abduction process, about Russification, about the identity deny of Ukrainian identity. So that is the first-hand report what I was listening to it.
Yeah. So I mean, they are, usually they get taking them to a number of sites, a number of places. For example, some of them for adoption, some of them go to the military schools,
Yeah,
some of them are being adopted,
yeah.
uh, and so what is, I mean, ultimately, what is the purpose? What it is that Russia wants to achieve by doing just that, um, kidnapping children and placing them in all kind of places. Many of them are being indoctrinated. to
Yeah.
become actually join the military, the Russian military for that matter. And like you just said, they're trying to change their identity. And many of these children, are moving toward that and becoming slowly becoming more and more Russian. Others are resisting. Some others are pretending that they are actually absorbing call it the Russian, being more of Russian.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but ultimately, what it is that Russia would like to achieve, what it is the objective? To torture the Ukrainian, to torture the parents? What are the ultimate gains? What it is that they want to gain out of this horrific practice of abducting children?
I think that is a part of any war. Right now we're discussing Ukrainian situation, but when we are reading about any other genocide and wars, when we are facing testimonies of victims of those wars and genocide, the sexual violence against women, also against children, abduction is a part of the strategy. So the idea of this strategy is to build support system for the perpetrators to use another one wave of a new soldier in the future, and also in this way to rebuild and switch identity of the people to the perpetrators. So I think that is the major idea and the
Yeah,
goal
but
from
isn't
my
there also
perspective.
another negative effect in terms of many of these children? Let's say that some of them are complying, some of them are joining, but many others remain very skeptical about it. They're hiding actually their real intention. And if they're being absorbed into the Russian society,
Yeah.
are they eventually necessarily going to be, citizens, royal citizens of Russia, or they're going to be in a position where they can actually hurt the Russian, that is, spying against Russia, doing certain things against
Yeah.
Russia as they grow up. I mean, there's always that potential. Are
Yes.
the Russians thinking in those terms? What are they doing about that? Or what?
But I think like abducting children is easy way to build this support system for the Russian, because children who are taken away from their families, from their environment, they are indoctrinated by ideas. They are afraid of their life. They are confused why that's happening. They are exposed to specific narratives and specific language. They need to adjust to the reality. That's the human nature, right? When we are under of any oppression situation, we need to adjust to the reality, especially children who cannot survive themselves. We have more capacity and possibility to navigate this complex situation. But children, they need to identify with an oppressor. You probably know the Stockholm syndrome, what is saying and describing this kind of adjustment. Like to survive, we need to identify psychologically with the with the oppressor, and that's often happening to children, and that is well described by Dr. Porch, who is the author of one really inspiring theory, polyvagal theory. 2 years ago, he published, 2 or 3 years ago, he published one of the, from my perspective as a psychologist, a really groundbreaking paper of how we navigating this traumatic, really complex traumatic situation, adjusting to perpetrators' requirements. I think for many of children in under these conditions and circumstances, that's happening. Like they need to identify with perpetrators. And I think Russians, they know that. That's something what they are using consciously.
But they are taking a certain risk for it, because not everyone is going to identify with Russian culture. And they're like, I mean, from my experience, knowing a situation like this is happening also in the Middle East during the
Yeah.
war, So they collaborate, they cooperate initially, but eventually they turn out against the enemy, so to speak. You alluded a little earlier about sexual violence. Based on my research on the subject, there's no definitive conclusion in terms of the extent of the sexual
Mhm.
trafficking, sexual violence. But definitely there is sexual violence. There is sexual, sex trafficking. What is your information? What do you know about the extent of this? Because I did not also find exactly what is, for example, the proportion of children, girls versus boys.
Mhm.
Or do you have some numbers related to that?
Mhm. So I don't have specific numbers, and I don't know of any official numbers from the Ukraine about children violated by sexual violence because of a few things, because of the confidentiality, and also this topic is highly unreported. So by the law and under this condition of the war, children are not interviewed without legal guardians. So that's is not always possible to fully get entire story from children itself themselves. Meanings like we are living as a society, as a Western society, under impression like talking about sexual violence by children is a traumatic experience more than their own experience, meaning that is kind of contradiction. I am fully aware what I'm saying
Yeah.
right now, right? Like socially, we thinking if we will be silent here, that would be more beneficial for children than talking about this experience. Of course, when they are willing and they are freely, for some reasons, are sharing their experience, that is reported, but is highly unreported. As you probably remember, I mentioned in my paper about Ukrainian situation, war, torture, and children in Ukraine, one case. I got an opportunity to interview survivors from Bucha, and it was a mother and 14 years old daughter, and they were both violated by the Russian forces. And the reason of the interview, it was like to provide psychosocial support and also educate, especially mother, how she can navigate their case. During this interview, they are both, they stayed in Poland. The interview were conducted over internet, and they agreed to use their data, meaning use to share with full confidentiality their story, not to highlight their personality. But during this interview, the mother decided to be with her daughter. She was sharing her story about her group rape experience. Daughter was a witness of this situation, and she was later on violated by two soldiers, and she was quiet. This teenage girl, she was quiet most of this interview. She only asked me once about if she will be remembering for forever what's happened to her. So we spoke briefly about this specific situation. I answered this question and I said, yes, you will remember this probably forever. We cannot decide, of course, and make like clear statement, but your feelings towards this experience will change after a while. And I was explaining why and what need to be done to navigate this experience better. So, because of this interview, I decide to write this paper later on, also including a case from the Stolen Children reports about a teenager boy who was tortured. It wasn't obvious, like he was sexually abused, but I know that's happening, especially when the Russian forces are moving forward and they are staying like the beginning of their stay, they are really violent towards the local populations.
Right, yeah. There were roughly, my understanding, about in total, less than 2,000 have been repatriated so far. And some of the stories, some of the experiences have been conveying, very little, very few spoke, in fact, of sexual abuse. Do
Yeah.
you concur with that? Because either that, are they because they're afraid to talk about it, they don't want to expose that, or is it because, in fact, it is not rampant as some people suggest is taking place?
I think we are still, as a societies, in general, not really ready to deal with the consequences of rape. So with cruelty, we don't want to know the stories. We
Yeah.
deny. We shaming often survivors. We deny their experiences.
Mm.
Also, we don't have, as a societies, in a place, a support system for them, right? Because talking about this experience is important, and it is. Reporting, it is also so important, but we need to be aware, like those people are looking for some support system, legal,
Of
medical,
course. Yeah.
psychological, and social.
Right.
And that is a gray area, as you know, in many different war zones. Even though I think Ukraine as a country moved forward with developing a lot of support system for the survivors. However, they are mostly located in big cities, but the war is located in different part of the Ukraine where many of those support systems are unavailable.
Yeah. So, the Russian, of course, are trying to explain, to justify what they are doing. And they are citing some examples. For example, they're taking them from a war zone to protect them. They are taking the orphans to find them, to find people to adopt them. Do you buy into that argument yourself? Because I personally have very, I don't really believe, obviously, many of the stories, many of the explanation that the Russians are providing. What's your experience with that?
I don't think so. Like, I am fully objective here. I fully support. I am personally. I am fully supporting from the beginning or even longer. Ukrainian fight for their identity. I understand their rights, and I am supporting their rights to fight for something what is determining their nation and also themselves. So I am finding this as a justification of the crimes. So every single perpetrator is doing that. So that's my understanding here. Maybe sometimes individually, some of those people are really helping some individuals, but in general, I am finding this kind of abduction activities, sexual violence, torture. We are still talking about children who are covered by international law, all right? And one of the laws is describing like abduction is illegal. So they
Of
cannot do
course.
this under the war circumstances, even if they are justifying this, as a human response to somebody, a particular situation.
Yeah. You mentioned the word torture. Obviously, the fact that being abducted is in and of itself very torturous. There's no doubt about it. But do you have any evidence or any knowledge of torturing children other than the nature of the abduction is being torturous itself? But are they being tortured? And if that's the case, what would be the reason to torture children, especially underage, like at the age of 10, 12, 15? Why would
Mhm.
that be? What would be the reason for Russian to torture children?
Mhm. So Many of children's, especially teenagers, especially boys, they are recognized as a potential threat for the Russian armies. And if you remember, one of the stories what I included in my paper is a 14-year-old boy who endured repeat electric shock torture. He was abducted. He stayed in jail, what also is against international law. During the first session, meanings like when the Russian forces collected stories, they use electric shocks. He described afterwards like the pain was unbelievable and he lost his feelings in his teeth. So
Right,
we're
right,
talking about this kind of level of cruelty. The reason was provided, of course, as like a spying on the Russian forces. That's a justification of this torture session. And it wasn't a one separate incident. Many of people underage, we are talking about group of people under 18 years old, they were subjected to this kind of situation. They stay in jail. They are witnessed other kind of crimes that
right.
is bringing, of course, another one level of traumatic experience, but also they are victims of torture activities itself.
You know, the observers, of course, are looking at this as a certain but violation of international law. Some, of course, are accusing Russia of crimes against humanity, war crimes, and some, of course, that go as far as that Russia is committing genocide by the mere fact when you take a certain group of people, forcibly change their identity, force them to accept different kind of citizenship that is not by their own will, by through pressure, intimidation, and force.
Yeah.
And that is by definition would constitute genocide. Do you buy into that, or do you feel this is probably going too far in characterizing these abductions to have some level of genocide component into that? And if
Um,
that is the case, of course, Russia is going to have to be accountable in one form or another. The time comes, sooner or later, the time will have to come.
Sooner or later, maybe later, probably in this case, in the context of the current international situation. So I am trying not to involve myself too much in this discussion because, from my perspective, as a person who is often working firsthand with survivors of torture and sexual violence survivors, I think as a psychologist also, and also as a researcher, that is theoretical discussion. And I understand necessity, to follow the law and also be compliant with the law. But from the victim perspective, that is not the most important. For them, the most important is to provide and react in appropriate way the support system and be with them when they need it. That is the most important part. So sometimes I think like we are wasting a lot of energy to discuss something theoretically, losing the numbers of violated people, and the number is increasing. So even now, even with all these activities in Ukraine, the numbers of violated children by torture is really unknown. That is incidental when we know something specific of some specific cases from some specific areas. But that need to be developed. From my perspective, it's more important to know that than to really make decision if the situation in Ukraine is meeting all criteria for the genocide or war. I am finding this as a theoretical discussion.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't particularly agree that it is necessarily only theoretical because in the final analysis, this issue is going to come to the fore. It's going to have to be discussed. And if there's a determination that it was a
Mhm.
crime against humanity, war crimes, not to speak of genocide, there's got to have to be some accountability. Um, there's going to be sometime, hopefully in the near future, some kind of negotiated settlement is going to happen. So are you suggesting that regardless of these horrific violation, it's like, crimes against humanity, war crime, genocide, can be should just simply set aside and just focus on trying to retrieve these children, repatriate them as a top priority, and not to concern ourselves with international law? But these violations have taken place. The Russia need to be accountable.
Absolutely.
And if that's the
Absolutely
case,
agree with that. But
who's going
yes.
to demand that accountability? Where that's going to come from? Basically,
So,
Russia can ignore almost just anybody, international or
mhm,
otherwise.
mhm. So we know how we are living in really a specific time when we know a lot about how trauma living in our body after a traumatic experience. And we know already, like providing appropriate support system, especially for the children after any kind of violation, is really important in some time frame. So, unfortunately, ongoing work is not supporting children violated by those crimes. And I understand itself, necessity to know, to determine what would be the next for the perpetrators. But from the trauma perspective, right now, we need to adjust supporting systems for children who need right now support, not after a while, not after determination, and they went through with, from the legal perspective, with war crimes or traumatic experiences, because this still is trauma experience.
Yeah, yeah. So in this regard, obviously the Ukrainian government already has taken and continues to take steps in order to deal with the current situation, and of course, as a continued, of course, hope that there will be mass repatriation at one point or another once there is a settlement. What are some of the preparation that the Ukrainian government are doing now to prepare to receive these kids back, or what it is that are the specific steps in order to ease their reintegration into the Ukrainian society? Some of the steps that you suggested in your paper, what are some of these steps that you feel are necessary? And is the Ukrainian government, in fact, preparing fully to what hopefully eventually will be significant repatriation of many of these children?
Mhm. I don't think so. That is happening right now. I know specifically, like the government has changed their understanding and they put in place different regulation regardless sexual violence. They supporting local groups, local NGOs who are working on this topic. One of those groups, they call them SEMA, that is the part of international networking of Dr. Mukwege networking, that's survivors of sexual violence, organized in 2018 after when Dr. Mukwege with Nadia Murad, they received a Nobel Prize. And Dr. Mukwege initiated a SEMA networking. SEMA in Swahili language means speak up. So this networking is international, also is based since 2019 in Ukraine, because we need to remember like a war in Ukraine started in 2014, not 4 years ago. That's we're
True,
talking
true,
about
yeah,
full
yeah,
scale
yeah.
invasion, but the activities took place 2014. And many of people, they were violated during this time between 2014 2019. However, later on they organized this network in Ukraine, and since 2019 SEMA Ukraine is really a powerful NGO who is actively supporting survivors firsthand, but also is cooperating with current government on legislation changes and support system for the survivors of the sexual violence in many levels, because they are changing a law. They are allowing changes related to the benefits. They also supporting families affected by imprisonment, especially women who left their children. I know like this topic about abducted children were discussed, but I don't know details. I am not saying like they are doing nothing, but I don't know details
Right.
here.
Let's talk a
So
lot.
that's only part what I know, of
Uh-huh.
course.
Right. Well, I to talk a little bit about the some countries are mediating and trying to repatriate some of these children. The leaders in this particular case in Qatar, South Africa, are involved in mediation, and they've been successful in retrieving some, dozens, not in the thousands.
Yeah.
Um, Now, and why, again, and I'm looking into that, Russian to some extent are cooperating
Mhm,
um, by the simple fact that 2,000, in fact, being returned to Ukraine, being repatriated to Ukraine.
mhm,
So, why Qatar, of all places? Why South Africa? The one who really mainly acting as mediator between the Ukrainian and Russia. Um, do you have any specific knowledge why Qatar, in particular in South Africa, are doing so, and why are they? To some extent, they have been more successful actually than
mhm.
other efforts, including the United Nations. United Nations, passed resolution, the
Yeah.
General Assembly demanding that all children be repatriated, but of course that did not happen, and I think the United Nations remain constrained in terms of to what extent, in fact, they can force Russia or compel Russia to act accordingly. So some of these mediators trying to play some kind of a role, nevertheless, have been successful in repatriating at least some 2,000 of these children. So the question is, what it is that, in fact, motivated the Russian to actually agree to allow this kind, number of these children to go back. When, if, I mean, on the one hand, they continue to abduct children. On the
Mhm,
other hand, they might say, well, they are returning, albeit small number, back to the Ukraine. What is the strategy here from your
mhm,
perspective of Russia? What are they trying to do? Simply
mhm,
to demonstrate we are cooperating or denying the fact, the extent of the abduction that have been conducting all of this.
mhm, mhm.
What is your take on that?
Probably you know much better than me, like every war has some levels of what we really know about political reasons of some kind of activities. And I suppose this is one of those levels, what we see as, of course, violation of the international law. But I think sometimes we're discussing some topics instead to put attention to something else. That's my understanding here. And also we need to remember like asking for some international support system of mediators is a great idea itself. But also we need to remember come from all those mediators are coming and how they are connected to the political system in Russia. Russia is powerful country, and we know somehow we know that they are still so active in the Middle East and also in Africa. They have huge support system in African countries for decades after when the African continent got independence. They were
Yes.
supporting many countries, building their, support system, governments, inviting people to study in Russia. So they are well known and well perceived in many countries. Actually, it was really surprising for me, like many countries, including Tanzania, they are supporting Russian war against Ukraine. That's not something what is unknown. So what I'm trying to say, we don't know the full story because we're observing what is happening here only, from the highlights of the journals most of the time. And that's one. And is for sure another one level of some political reason what is play off here because of other interest here.
What I noticed, however, um, the the pressure on Russia could come from various corners. Could
Mhm,
come from the United Nations, could come from the United States, for that matter, to the extent
mhm,
Trump is interested in doing with that. It's coming from other countries. I understand even Russia, China, as a matter of fact,
mhm,
in asking the Russian to stop this practice of abducting Ukrainian children.
mhm,
I don't know the extent of how true this particular report. Nevertheless, the what is missing, that I notice is missing, is a media coverage. That is, if you look at the media today, I look to see how much
mhm,
coverage these abductions are taking place. And really, it's very scant. I did not find much coverage. And coverage of this particular issue is
mhm,
extremely important. That is, if you want to put public pressure on Russia, you have to expose the
mhm.
extent of this horrific violation, human rights
Direction.
violation that's
Mhm,
taking place. Why is it that the media is pretty much, not saying much about it, and which is so important in terms of creating that public pressure on the Russian Federation. What's happening there? Why is it, for example, the Ukrainian government is not
mhm,
making a supreme effort to keep publishing and talking about it to international media so that the people,
mhm,
will know what is going on? Why is it missing? Why the Ukrainian government is not making that kind of supreme effort to use a single tool, which is probably
mhm,
the most impactful one, in order to hopefully affect some kind of change in the Russian behavior toward these children.
mhm. I don't think so. Like this is the most important topic right now for many of Ukrainians. Is just day by day. They are living under really horrific condition right now, without electricity, without access to the water, often without heat in their apartments. I am talking right now about Kiev. You probably know that, right? Like this winter is really traumatic and horrific for many of Kievian who are staying in the capital city. So, and even though it was a lot of attempts to really negotiate between Russia and Ukraine, everything failed, and Russia is continuing bomb shelling and war activities. They are not showing any symptoms of any attempt to end this war. So that's my interpretation of that, right? Like because they are fighting for their lives, they are not maybe really focusing on the children who are already abducted. I know like many of the journalists from Kiev Independence Journal, they are working on those topics. We were discussing one of them, Olesha Bida, who is well-known investigator and journalist in Kiev, who received some prize, if I remember, 2 years ago for her documentary about uprooted children. That's the title of the documentary, Uprooted. And the story is dedicated to abducted children by the
Yeah.
Russians. So I think when we are discussing the war activities, is always what is the first right now, not what would be the most important, what is the most, in general, beneficial for the nation, only how to navigate day by day situation. And I think the Ukraine is right now on this stage of the war, like they are literally navigating
Yeah.
a day by day surviving.
But nevertheless, though, in the negotiation and the peace talk that have been taking place, they are talking about how much land Ukraine will
Mhm,
surrender, to make the annexation of Crimea to be a permanent one. But they do not talk. I have not seen in any of these negotiations a mention
Mm-hmm.
of the need to repatriate the Ukrainian
Children.
children that have been
Mm-hmm.
abducted.
Mm-hmm.
So it is not even in my, based on what I've seen in my
Mm-hmm.
research, they are not talking about that, albeit everyone is saying that eventual agreement between the two sides will have to will have
Mm-hmm.
to require
Yeah.
the repatriation of all children. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that's going to ever happen.
Mm-hmm.
All children, specifically, for example, we have more than 10,000 orphans
Mm-hmm.
that have been adopted by their parents and Russian parents. How who's going to claim them back?
Right.
So there is no focus, not other than absence of media coverage,
Mm-hmm.
but it also is not the central one of the main topics to be being discussed. I know what you're saying. Of course, they want to discuss ending the war. They're busy from day to day. How to deal with tomorrow, rather than talking about the abducted children. Nevertheless, in the peace talk, shouldn't that be a topic to be
Mm-hmm.
discussed along the line with surrendering some territories and compensation, all of that goes with it?
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. But when you was talking, I was wondering, about the complexity of this situation, especially related to the children who are already adopted, right? Like from the legal standpoint, how to proceed with this kind of cases. I'm just wondering. I am not saying like that is impossible to proceed. However, this situation is really complex and is getting much more complex day after day. Mhm.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the political a little bit about this whole issue in the political context of what's going on. Now, Trump, when the day he assumed power, he said he's going to end, even before he came back to power, he's going to end the war in Ukraine in a single day. Well, now 14, 15 months later, the war is still raging. The other concern, of course, I have is that whereas Trump limited the supplies of weapons
Mhm.
to the Ukraine, which is detrimental in many
Mhm.
respects. Um, he's growing steadily unhappy with the reaction what the Putin is doing. So he's neither not taking the decisive steps, either push and stay focused on reaching an agreement and ending the war. And if Putin is resisting, why
Mhm.
not continue to provide the Ukraine with the necessary weapons that they need in order to change the dynamic in the battlefield?
Mhm.
So I'm not surprised how Trump is behaving. But in my view, the United States, in fact, is contributing rather than trying to end this war by vacillating, by not taking specific firm stand and
Mhm.
say, enough is enough. We're going to
Mhm.
provide the Ukraine with all the weapons they need in order to force
Mhm.
Russia to come to the negotiating table and seriously negotiating an end to the war,
Mhm.
or you know, what I'm seeing is Trump is putting more pressure on Zelensky to concede on more territory rather than putting the pressure on Russia. Obviously, we know the story. I mean, he admires Putin for many different
Yeah.
reasons, but he is also sacrificing, European Western interest in this regard. I know this is you haven't talked about in your paper in terms of the political
Mhm.
the dimension of this particular conflict. What is your take on that?
Well, the first what I would like to say thank you for talking openly about this topic, and that's remind me an article what I was reading recently about the biggest betray of Ukrainians itself, what came from United States. From the political perspective, they are saying like this betrayal is political, is covering everything what came after when President Trump became a president here and afterwards. So I understand this perspective because their expectation, and I think Western war expectation, was related to end this war and work on peace, what is also a long-term process. That's it's not, we know that, right? Like saying like that's the end of the war is not ending the war consequences. So, because of the current political situation in the United States and I think mostly business related connection here, this war is beneficial for many parties here, even for those parties who, in general, they need to be supportive of they have been supportive for a while to end this war. It's not anymore this case.
Yeah, well, I mean, and of course now Europe was trying to step in, committing some 80 billion euros to the war efforts. It's been blocked temporarily right now by Hungary, which is awful to say the least, that one country within the EU is vetoing what the European community would like to do. So that's the whole situation now remains to some extent in limbo. In the interim, Russia is making, incremental gains in the battlefield. Zelensky is being squeezed because he's not getting clear, support
Support system and
from the United States in particular. And and I think rightfully he is asking that any solution, any peace agreement will have to entail uh, ironclad security by the West,
yes.
specifically the United States, before the Ukraine is will be prepared to
Agree to anything,
to
yes.
make any territorial concessions.
Mhm.
And he hasn't been really getting that kind of solid commitment either from the United States. Europeans are more prepared. Like for British, for example, Germany said they'll be prepared to send some troops.
Mhm.
There's a certain condition to make sure that, to prevent Russia from
Mhm.
attacking Ukraine once again. Um, so all of these pieces are not falling into place.
Mhm.
And what I see, and I'm trying to evaluate this whole situation, is this could drag another year or even more than a year, or maybe even two, before we can see some kind of light at the end of the tunnel. Is that
Mhm.
assessment as well?
Like from my perspective, I'm expecting the war third. I am not thinking like this war on Ukraine is going to end. I am thinking more like the Russia is trying to expand their territorial, requirements and is really interested of involving other countries in this war activities. That's my understanding. So I'm not sure if the peace in Ukraine is even possible in 1 year if we are talking about this kind of war extension.
Yeah, one would think, Russia that has the largest territory in than any other country, extending from Europe all the way to the east, far east, would want more territory. But obviously, do you buy into the argument that they have security concern, that they do not want a country like the Ukraine bordering Russia to be part of Europe, part of NATO, part of the EU, because of security issues. I mean, I personally don't buy into that argument.
Yeah.
They could have easily have a very, very good relationship with the Ukraine. There's, traditionally, culturally, historically, they've had very close relationship all along. Why all of this is all of a sudden is needed? So there is no really Russian claim that there's a concern of
Mhm.
having NATO being at its border. I don't buy into that argument. I suppose you agree with that premise.
Yes, I agree with that completely. Yes.
So before we conclude, we're coming toward the end. We can talk about it so much more, and hopefully we'll have another opportunity. How would you like to conclude that? What would you like to see happen in conclusion?
Oh, As an endless optimist, I would like to see a peace in Europe and peace all over the world. I wish to people in Ukraine strength, and I really think like they are showing in many different again levels their ability to deal with something what is unimaginable, and that's related to war and also to their history. Because when we're talking about Ukrainian, we're talking about their previous experiences related to Holodomor, to the first war, the third actually Holodomors. It was not one, only third. So I would like to see some solution, and I would like to see like as humans we can overcome this cruelty time what is right now all over the world in every single corner. And I would like to see like the rights of children they are respected, not only by the law, not only by the paper, but in reality. uh, Talking today about Ukrainian situation and Ukrainian children, that is not separate topic. I was sending you another one paper of the case from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the research paper what I completed with my colleagues, a president of the local NGO in Goma, because of the homeless children and all these changes related to the war activities between Rwanda and DRC. And
Right.
again, we're talking about situation when from the legal perspective, rights of the children they are covered, but from the reality perspective, they are completely unrecognizable and not respected and not even noticed as requirements, as a basic human rights requirement. So I wish for the Ukrainian children, like I wish them like to be respected, but also I would like to see like other children all over the places and they are respected as well.
Well, thank you so much. I share your sentiment, and I do hope, specifically when it comes to children, that this will come to an end sooner than later. And that is, we can all hope for at this point, and I hope that reason eventually will prevail on all sides and come to the conclusion its time has come to end this misery, to end this war, that it's no
Yeah,
one in
thank you
fact could
so
come.
much, Professor. Thank you for all your work, what you're doing. Thank you for giving me space to talk about this topic. And I hope maybe sometimes in the future we can discuss something more optimistic.
I hope so. Thank you again, Wiola.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for taking the time, and all the best to you.
Thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye now. Thanks
Bye.
again. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this episode on the issues. You can find this podcast on my SoundCloud page, and stay tuned to my social media accounts for the latest analysis and announcements.